I put myself inside this 1x1 border and I'm going to survive the next 100 days here. Every day the border will expand by 1 block to allow me to progress further and collect more resources. I'll have limited access to food, a finite amount of blocks, and of course, it's hardcore Minecraft, so if I die, it's all over. Let's see what happens when a limitless world becomes an inescapable prison, starting with day 1 where I surveyed my surroundings to see if anything useful was nearby. I was pretty happy to see both a village and some sheep, and after admiring the beauty of the nature around me, I quickly got to work destroying it by punching the tree directly under me. I made a crafting table and a pickaxe, and within 1 minute of being in the world, I committed the cardinal sin of Minecraft by digging straight down. Once I had enough stone, I slapped the crafting table back down and crafted a full set of stone tools. Without much else to do, I just sat there and waited for the next day, or for some creeper to fall down on top of me and turn this from a YouTube video into a YouTube short. When the border finally expanded the next day, I mined a staircase back up to the surface and cut down more of the tree that had been exposed. I put down the crafting table and noticed I had gotten a wheat seed from some of the grass I accidentally broke, which was a huge win since food was going to be really scarce for a while. I held onto it for later and crafted a furnace, which I used to turn my limited wood into charcoal. I made some torches and went back down into my makeshift mine since there wasn't much else to do, but hope I got lucky with some ore. Thankfully, I found copper ore on my way down, which as we all know is the single most useful ore in the entire game. I was worried I was gonna find coal or even iron ore. Boy, am I glad I dodged that bullet and could make a lightning rod now instead of a bunch of useless iron tools. Once I got back to the surface, I crafted a stone hoe, planted the wheat seed, and spent the rest of the day putting cobblestone stairs down into the mine. As the sun rose, the border grew again and I was able to break more grass, netting me another wheat seed, which I promptly planted next to the first one that had already made pretty noticeable progress to becoming fully grown. I hoped that my luck with seeds would translate to saplings as I broke the last log of the tree that I spawned on and waited patiently for a single sapling to drop. It wasn't as if the entire video hinged on this one tree dropping a single sapling for me, but if it didn't drop one, I was gonna have to restart the world just so I could burn down this same tree. I ended up getting quite lucky and got 2 saplings and an apple dropped, which meant the video could continue. I planted both saplings and went back down into the mine where I collected more useless copper for some reason that I can't even explain since I legitimately never end up using it. Lucky for me, the Minecraft gods took pity on me and I was able to mine 2 pieces of coal that were quickly converted into torches so I could continue digging the mine down even deeper. I didn't end up finding more ore, but when I returned to the surface, a tree had grown, so I chopped it down, waited for the leaves to despawn, and then hid from the rain in the darkness of night sitting inside the mine. When the rainy night turned into a slightly brighter but still rainy morning, I returned to the surface to find another tree had grown. I chopped down that tree and yet again waited patiently for the leaves to despawn since the prior tree actually hadn't given me any saplings. The tree rewarded my patience with 2 saplings that I replanted before, you guessed it, I returned back down to the mine. Eventually, I got the mine all the way down to bedrock, but still hadn't found a single piece of iron, so I went back up to Y level 15 and started mining out every single block until I hit the border in hopes of finding something. It wasn't like I was asking to find the Fountain of Youth or the meaning of life in there, I was just really trying to find some iron. Eventually, I did find iron, but it taunted me from outside the border, so I just kept mining all the while thinking of pretty stupid things that I could say when I eventually got to mine it. When the message appeared on my screen, I played it cool and casually made my way up to the iron, which I mined so viciously apparently that my pickaxe broke. I guess it should have minded its own business and not taunted me. It just picked the wrong guy to mess with. I'm just gonna breeze by it and assume you all laughed at those jokes, and we'll keep going. Back on the surface, I put my iron in to smelt and crafted a chest to dump all my junk into. Like a true hardcore player, I crafted a shield and spent the rest of the day repeating the cycle of mining and chopping down trees. I had been so carried away with mining that I kept going after the border expanded and just continued to waste my pickaxe durability and inventory space on copper ore. I'll just pretend I was mining it out of frustration since it wasn't coal ore or iron ore, but as we all know, I was just mindlessly clicking buttons at 4 in the morning, and a cat was asleep on my keyboard. After making a rare appearance above ground, I did the whole tree chopping thing and was able to finally smelt down enough iron to make a pickaxe. I used the iron pickaxe to mine the exposed gold and redstone that I found earlier, and then went all the way down to Y level -58 to start hunting for some diamonds. I actually managed to get pretty lucky and got diamonds extremely quickly, but was scared when I only saw 2 diamond ore. I told myself there was no way Minecraft would betray me like this, so I mined around the ore randomly and found one more hidden diamond, giving me enough to make a diamond pickaxe. I ended up finding even more diamonds, but only one was within the border, so the rest would have to wait for another day. The second the border grew the next day, I sprinted to the newly exposed diamond to mine it, and by the time I made it back to the surface midday, I had 6 diamonds to my name. At this point, I actually had about as many diamonds as I had iron, which just felt wrong. I spent the rest of the day chopping down trees as usual and crafted more chests that I used to attempt to organize my cluttered belongings. While I was working, it finally happened. Phantoms spawned in for the first time. I guess my lack of sleep was finally getting to me and I was just going insane. Had I even really found 6 diamonds? Did iron even exist in the world? Why wouldn't Minecraft let me sleep on the cold hard ground when I would so quickly and easily do it in real life? All good questions that I pondered while I hid in the mine waiting for daylight to come and save me. As the prior night had clearly indicated, not having a shelter for when Minecraft's biggest mistake since the birch tree decided to spawn in was a huge problem, so I leveled the area within the border to start building a house. I had pretty limited resources to work with, so it was a bit difficult to design, but I already knew since I had no spruce wood, this build would at best be like a 4 out of 10. I framed the entire house using oak support beams and made the porch out of cobblestone. Unfortunately, due to completely unavoidable technical difficulties like my hard drive filling up to 100% and cutting the recording, we returned to the regularly scheduled broadcasting on day 12 with me hiding from phantoms inside my partially constructed house. Once the phantoms died, I finished up constructing the roof and added some details around the exterior trim of the house. I cleaned up the area behind it and tried to make it look a little bit more natural, and then filled in the upper portion of the mine since it was right in front of the house and a little bit of a hazard. As the sun set, I moved the crafting table and furnace inside and made a bunch of chests that I put along the back wall. I spent the rest of the night braving the darkness outside to chop down some trees and light up everywhere inside the border. I started off the next day like any other and harvested my crops before doing a quick loop around the border to break any newly exposed grass for seeds. I expanded the wheat farm with all the seeds that I got and started moving everything inside from the 2 double chests that were still sitting in front of my house. I tried to keep some semblance of organization in my chests by laying out where every block would go so I could just shift click everything into the chests and it should organize itself. I wasn't sure how long this would last, but it was better than my usual system, which was no system, so I just went with it. I used some of the excess dirt that I had to do some terraforming in front of the house and then converted a bunch of oak logs into charcoal since coal continued to elude me. With my newly acquired fuel source, I made even more torches and cleared out a new entrance to the mine where I spent the rest of the day digging away at bedrock in hopes of finding more diamonds. I continued mining into the next day, and while I was walking up the stairs, I heard what sounded like a bunch of mobs throwing a party inside a cave nearby. I refused to be the only one not invited to this party, so I dug around randomly until I stumbled upon the cave. There was a zombie villager that I did consider saving, but I figured I'd get plenty of villagers from the village above ground and just slaughtered everything inside the cave. Turns out that's why I wasn't invited to the party. I heard even more mobs having a good time nearby and decided I had to ruin their day too, so I dug around again until I found that cave, and this time I was greeted by a lot more mobs that put up a better fight. Thankfully, my expert ability to hide around corners came in handy, and I cleared out all the mobs and lit up the small cave before returning to the surface where I did some more terraforming and expanded my wheat farm. When the border expanded, I went back down into the mine and quickly expanded the diamond mine at bedrock as far as it could go. Unfortunately, it seemed my initial diamond luck had gone away, so I returned to the surface with just a bit of iron and gold. I did my daily chore of chopping down trees and replanting the saplings around the house, and then made a carrot farm using a single carrot one of the zombies dropped me. Clearly, he understood the importance of a balanced diet. I smelted down the iron I just found and made 2 buckets that I used to grab water from one of the caves that I had just lit up. While I was down in the mine, I started to branch mine at Y level 15, again in hopes of finding more iron, and got decently lucky finding some iron and coal. When I got back above ground, I used my newly acquired water to make an infinite pool, and was finally able to put water near both farms to hydrate the soil. I sorted out my mess of an inventory and put all the ore into smelt before going outside to tackle the monstrosity of trees that had grown while I was pretending to be a mole digging underground. I hacked away at it with my stone axe for a while and had to craft another one to even finish cutting it all down. I waited a bit for the leaves to despawn and replanted the saplings once I had collected enough. I crafted an iron chestplate and iron boots since I was now taking on hordes of mobs down in cave systems, and immediately went back down into the mine to test out my new gear. I dispatched a skeleton skeleton guarding iron ore with ease and continued down to bedrock to mine for more diamonds. Unfortunately, the mining trip was a little bit less than ideal, but I kept telling myself that diamond ore was just one more block away, and the next day would be when I'd show them. Since mining was clearly not my forte, I spent the rest of the day doing yard work like harvesting and expanding the farms, chopping down trees, and terraforming the area outside the house. The next 5 days were relatively uneventful since I continued to do the same chores day after day while I waited for the border to continue expanding. I would chop down and replant the trees, harvest and expand both the wheat and carrot farms, and then spend the rest of the day down in the mine. Thankfully, I did manage to find even more diamonds, and even though it was only a single vein, it netted me 10 diamonds. Eventually, I had found enough iron to comfortably finish off my iron armor and upgrade all my remaining tools to iron. This shiny new gear wouldn't fix the fact that I had now been awake for over 20 days straight, but it would help me defeat the small vicious airplanes that were dive bombing me every night. It seemed as if the game was rewarding me for my bravery fending off the agents of nightmare it sent to test my resolve, because when I went outside on day 22, there was a poor, unsuspecting villager that had gotten stuck inside the border. Fun fact, things can in fact wander into the border, but then they can't get back out. I trapped the villager in a boat and then surrounded him with cobblestone in front of the mine entrance since he was now my single most valuable asset. As if finding a villager wasn't good enough, when I went outside on day 23 to collect more seeds, I noticed the sheep had also gotten stuck inside the border. The thought of finally having a bed to sleep in was enough to make me tear up, so I led the sheep back to the house with wheat and quickly trapped them inside a small pen. I sheared the sheep, and while I only got 2 wool, the last piece of wool was so close I could almost taste it. On the off chance the sheep had performance anxiety, I decided to not sit and watch, so I harvested both farms while I waited for them to eat. I was able to shear them a second time right after I finished farming and immediately crafted a bed. With one major problem tackled, I started handling the next big issue by digging out a large area next to the house. The sun set while I was working, so I took the chance to get my first night's sleep and finally said goodbye to the phantoms. I can assure you I was not going to miss them. Once the sun was up, I got right back to work and filled in the hole that I dug with water. The hole was the proper size to fish for treasure if I cast right in the middle, so that's exactly what I did for the next 2 days. There wasn't any sugarcane nearby, and so my master plan was to fish for enchanted books so I could make a lectern and then buy more bookshelves from the librarian. The chance of getting treasure from a cast in open water is 5%, and the chance of that being an enchanted book is about 17%, meaning it would take roughly 100 casts per enchanted book. After 2 days of fishing, my fishing rod was almost broken, so I crafted up some extra torches and then went down into the mine to hunt for some spiders to get more string to make a new one. I went back into the caves that I had found previously, and while I killed a lot of mobs, unfortunately none of them were spiders. In one of the caves, I came across a fair bit of lava that was about to be within the world border, so I made a note of it, did a bit more mining where I found a few veins of iron, and went back to the surface to get another good night's sleep. I figured a lava generator might be useful to have since lava would be a limited resource within the border, so I cleared out an area at the mine entrance and set up some dripstone with a cauldron under it and a lava source above it. It wouldn't be very fast, but it would mean I would have lava at the surface if I ever needed it due to a pillager or something coming by that I couldn't directly kill. Since I didn't want to wait for 10 buckets of lava to generate, I hauled some extra buckets of lava up from the cave to make a nether portal in one of the upper areas in the mine. Eventually I realized I was being stupid, which seemed pretty par for the course at this point, and I just used my pickaxe to mine obsidian down in the cave to save myself repeatedly walking up and down the stairs. I finished off the portal and went back to sleep before embarking on my trip to the Nether. The start of day 28 was when I put my secondary plan into action. I crafted up gold boots and a flint and steel and went down to light the Nether portal. I mined around a bit to scope out the Nether, which also had a border limiting what I could work with. Unfortunately, the area looked pretty awful with huge lava pools on the ground and no Nether fortress in sight, but I actually had a different goal in mind and continued wandering around until I found a piglin. I trapped the piglin and did some trading with the limited gold that I had, and to my amazement, I actually got a Soul Speed 2 enchanted book. The odds of this happening with such little gold were extremely low, so it almost made up for having nothing to show for 2 days of fishing. I headed back to the overworld where I made a grindstone and disenchanted the book that would eventually allow me to craft a lectern. After all the excitement of getting the enchanted book, I needed some downtime to relax, so the next day was mostly just a farming day. I harvested both the wheat and carrot farms and replanted them before chopping down the amalgam of trees that had grown while I was distracted doing other things. Right as I finished cutting down the last tree, I noticed my extremely intelligent, expertly crafted trap had worked, and another villager had walked into the border to take a job at the composter. I trapped the villager in a boat and brought them over to the first villager that I had closed in before closing both of them in the cobblestone box together. You know, for their own protection. With 2 villagers, a sheep, and a book, I basically already had fully enchanted netherite gear. It didn't take long for me to get tired of living in fear of one of my villagers somehow dying or disappearing or something, so I spent the next 3 days making an infinite villager breeder. I cleared out some space behind the house and built an enclosed carrot farm with a composter in the middle to make one of the villagers a farmer. I added in the trap to catch the baby villagers and carry them out of range once they grew up, and I put down 4 beds outside the carrot farm. Unfortunately, I then came to the hard part of moving the villagers into the farm, and let's just say it was not a pretty sight. Eventually, I got both the villagers and the breeder, and was one step closer to having an army of annoying Squidwards at my disposal. I wanted to give the villagers a bit of a nudge to start breeding to make sure I set up the farm correctly, so I harvested my carrot farm and tossed a bunch of carrots into the breeder to expedite the process just a little bit. Almost immediately, the villagers started getting nasty, like right in front of me, so I definitely looked the other way and didn't stare directly into their eyes while it happened. After getting proof the villager breeder did work, I went to take care of my other chores and noticed a new villager had gotten trapped inside the border, so I also put them in a boat before doing the usual stuff like chopping down trees and harvesting my wheat farm. Now that I had more resources and some extra space to work with, I started leveling out the dirt around the house and moving chests from inside the house to temporary ones outside. Once all the items were moved, I started hacking into my old house with my axe like some deranged surgeon. It took nearly 2 days to clear out every last bit of the house, but after it was done, I had a nice blank canvas to work with. Before starting to build the new house, I mapped out roughly where the center of the border was, since it would bother me to no end if I built the house skewed towards one side more than the other. I started out by building the outline of the first floor of the house using different variations of oak, since I really didn't have much else to use, but in the end I actually felt like it struck a good balance of texture and color variation. It was no spruce wood, that's for sure, but it would have to do for now. I spent the next 2 days building the second floor and roof for the house. I used the exact same style of blocks for the second floor since I had future plans to add in a few more details to help break it all up. I mixed in some stone bricks for the trim of the roof so the entire house wasn't made completely out of wood, and tried to give it a bit of an asymmetrical design, partially because I liked the style, but mainly because if stuff didn't match, I could just claim it was intentional. Day 39 and 40 were both detailing days, which are always fun. I collected a bunch of different blocks for adding in details like trapdoors, lanterns, and dirt. I started off with the classic of adding in dirt with trapdoors around it under the windows like some kind of planter that could have different flowers eventually put on top. I used even more trapdoors to give the windows shutters in hopes it would further break up the texture. Unfortunately, I would have preferred to use birch for the shutters and spruce for the planters, but alas, I just had classic oak, so I made the best of it. I put lanterns down on the corners of the roof, but had to be kinda sparing since I didn't have a solid supply of iron just yet. To finish things off, I sheared a bunch of leaves and collected some flowers to put around the house. I mainly put leaves on the roof to break up the mass of brown, and then put the flowers randomly in the planters with the occasional clump of leaves on the ground as well, because, I mean, who doesn't love more leaves? Pretty much the entire next day was spent running back and forth, transferring items from the chests outside the house to the new ones that were inside the house. I wanted to have a fancy storage room and make the inside of the house look super nice, but my brain was pretty fried after so many days of building the house itself, so I just properly sorted everything into chests like before and called it quits as the sun was going down. When I had been shearing leaves, I noticed some animals inside the border, so I used some wheat to lure the sheep and cow down to the sheep pen that I already had. I got the sheep trapped inside the pen with the other sheep, and then allowed the cow to enjoy her last minutes of freedom while I gathered the materials to build her a pen as well. I trapped her inside her pen alone and shed a single tear, not because she was so lonely, but because I couldn't breed cows and slaughter them just yet. Luckily, I could breed the sheep now, and I did just that, and the game awarded me for finally learning what happens when one sheep loves another sheep very much. After that, it seemed like my day could only go downhill, so I used it as an opportunity to do the chores I had been slacking on, like yet again chopping down trees after spending all my wood on the mansion. It had been ages since I went mining, so I used the next 2 days to take a break from the sun and gather some resources underground. I had a lot of new area to mine in since the border had expanded a bunch, so I dug a ton of new branch mining tunnels and managed to find some diamonds, iron, and gold, which is always a good thing. I also ran into a geode, which was pretty cool to have within the border. Spoiler alert, I never actually used anything from it, but it's still cool regardless. I returned to the house with a really nice haul of loot as the sun set on day 44, so I dumped all my valuables in my chests and snuck in a quick nap. I started out day 45 by chopping down the trees again since I was running really low on wood. I kept having to convert the wood into charcoal since I wasn't really gonna have much luck finding coal way down at bedrock, but thankfully I had plenty of space to grow trees, so it wasn't that much of an issue as long as I remembered to continue chopping them down. The border had finally expanded enough that I was able to break into the pen in the village and lure the cows over to my own pen where I could breed them. I bred the cows right away and then stole the villagers' bales of hay and their horse armor. I figured they wouldn't really need them anymore since I also stole their animals, so it just kind of seemed like the right thing to do. The next day I returned to working on the house by building a staircase up to the second floor and then digging out a staircase down to the soon-to-be basement. I spent the rest of the day clearing out the basement that I planned to house my villagers in. You might be thinking,
Rage, that's a super bad idea because villagers are really loud.
and to that I say you're 100% correct and I'm an idiot. Once the basement was cleared out, I started decorating it since I wanted a nice place for my villagers to be trapped for all eternity. I used oak logs for pillars and support beams like I had for the rest of the house, but I also tried to work in a design using stripped oak logs and different andesite block variants to hold each villager in place. I realized pretty quickly that not having each section of the wall be an odd number of blocks was a pretty big mistake, but there wasn't much I could do about it now, so I only put villager trading areas in where there were an odd number of blocks and left the rest empty. After expending even more resources building the house, I used the next day to do the boring jobs like breeding the animals and chopping down trees. I was also running low on andesite, so I took a trip down into the mine to quickly snag a stack or two for finishing the detailing in the basement. When I returned home, I used the newly collected building blocks to plan out how I wanted to use the remaining spaces left in the basement walls where I couldn't put villagers. I settled on just putting a bunch of chests there to eventually store the emeralds or the random junk that I was pawning off on the villagers for said emeralds. After making more progress designing the area I was going to imprison my villagers in, I went upstairs and further denied a villager basic human rights by kicking him out of the bed so I could sleep. Since multiple villager trading areas were now ready to go in the basement, I decided to not stall any longer and spent the next 2 days moving villagers over from the breeder. Initially, I tried using boats to catch random villagers wandering around inside the border, but moving them up in elevation was way too difficult, so I eventually gave up and wasted a ton of my limited iron making a minecart and rails to easily get villagers from inside the villager breeder. I didn't have enough gold left to make powered rails, which apparently are essential to making this whole thing work, so I failed miserably for a few minutes before also giving up on that plan. Thankfully, the villager breeder was slightly higher in elevation than the house, which meant I could just use a boat to pull villagers out of the breeder and then very slowly row them down into the basement, which is exactly what I did. I had to tear up some of the house to get inside with a boat, but by the end of the day, I had 2 farmer villagers trapped in the basement, ready to do some trading. I realized I was gonna need a lot of carrots and wheat if I wanted to get enough emeralds for bookshelves and then mending books, so I planted a new carrot farm outside the house, partially for functionality and partially for decoration. I wasn't a huge fan of the farm being pushed right up against a steep hill since it looked kind of weird, so I also did some terraforming to get a bit more space in front of the house. This meant covering up the entrance to the mine again, but I plan to eventually connect the mine to the basement of the house anyway. I cleared out extra space to the side of the house as well and planted a new wheat farm opposite the carrot farm. I wanted to make full use of my villagers, so I made a third farm towards the back of the house and used it to plant the limited number of potatoes that I had. I figured carrots and potatoes were likely the best for trading with the farmers, so getting as many as possible would be super important once I got a librarian. When I went back downstairs, I realized one of the farmers' trades were different than before since I hadn't locked them in yet, so I replaced the composter a few more times until the trades were for wheat and potatoes, and then I locked them in by trading pretty much all my wheat away. I finished off the day by chopping down the trees in the rain, which was a nice way to clear my head after a tough day of being a wheat and carrot and potato farmer. As the sun rose on a new day, I did some animal breeding and then started the painstaking process of moving more villagers into my basement. I had to break into the house again so I could row in with the boat, but it definitely went smoother this time since I knew what I was doing for once. I trapped a villager in and made them a Fletcher, which would normally be the best for getting emeralds, but much like with most useful resources, I didn't have any bamboo. I made the arguably bold choice of turning tons of my limited supply of wood into sticks to trade with the Fletcher, and then went outside to take out my frustration of not having bamboo on some of the animals in the overly crowded pens. It definitely had been a little bit since I did any mining, so I went down into the mine on day 54 to make use of the newly available space since the border had expanded. I started out by doing even more branch mining for diamonds at bedrock, but my luck was pretty rough since I was only finding redstone and a bit of iron. After a while, I went to explore some caves, and after fighting my way through a couple smaller ones, I stumbled on a massive cavern that was absolutely crawling with mobs. I fought my way inside and managed to snag a bit of iron, but I was way too scared to take on the entire area with my unenchanted iron armor, so I made a mental note of where it was and to come back later when I was less of a chicken and had OP armor to make up for my lack of skills in the game. After spending 2 days down in the mine, I wanted to get some sun, so I expanded the fishing pond just a little bit to make sure it was sufficient to get treasure, even if my cast wasn't perfectly in the center. I cast a few times before realizing my fishing rod was nearly broken and I didn't have enough string to make a new one. I quickly looked up all the different ways to get string and had a genius idea that's a little bit unconventional. I ran around looking for cats that had run away from the village and found one way behind my house that unfortunately didn't like me only having 2 raw fish. I quickly returned to fishing to get a bit more and had to fight my way back to the cat at night to tame it. Once the cat was tamed, I brought it back to the house with me and went to sleep with the cat sleeping on top of me. Unfortunately, when I woke up, the first option of getting string didn't pan out, as the random present the cat brought me was actually a rabbit's foot when it could have been string. I used up the remaining casts that I had left with my nearly broken fishing rod to get more raw fish, and then ran all over the place trying to find another cat so I could tame a second one to use for breeding. I had multiple cats yelling at me earlier on in the video, so I knew at least one more had to be inside the border. I managed to find a brown cat hiding in some tall grass and trapped it along with my other cat in a hole. I tamed the new cat and then bred both of them with the little fish that I had left. I'm nothing if not generous though, so I made a new pen for the cats next to the sheep and cows instead of leaving them in a hole in the ground, and then brought 2 cats into it, leaving 1 cat to sleep on me, still having hopes of getting more string that way. Yet again, I woke up to nothing good, but this time it wasn't even junk, it was just nothing. Kind of a new twist on an old game. I figured now that I could breed the cats, the slim chance I got string when I slept wasn't all that useful, so I brought the 3rd cat down to the pen and bred both adult cats again. While I was over there, I also chopped down all the trees and killed a few of the cows since their pen was being overrun. I spent the rest of the sunny part of the day running around the entire area, lighting up the newly exposed world with torches. Once the sun set, I went down into the mine in hopes of clearing out more of the large cave and potentially finding a spider or 2 to finance my new fishing rod. I had to fight a lot of mobs, but I found a ton of ore, which was great, and I actually got lucky with getting more string from a spider. I was mining some iron as the border expanded, so I took that as my cue to head back up to the base. I cleared out my inventory, crafted a new fishing rod with the string I just got, and spent the entire rest of the day and night fishing and breeding my cats. The next 3 days were pretty much just me fishing, since the odds of me getting an enchanted book were roughly 1 in every 100 casts, and I needed 2 more to make a bookshelf to then make a lectern. As expected, my fishing rod broke multiple times during the painstaking process of fishing for the books, and I had to do the unthinkable. I had to kill the cats that I had been breeding to get string to get more fishing rods. And as if I didn't feel bad enough already, because the cats were all tamed, the game had to go and announce that I killed them in chat every single time. So yeah, I pretty much spent my time fishing and killing, which is just like back in the good old days. After 4 days of fishing all day and all night, I finally had 2 enchanted books along with tons of fish, name tags, and even an enchanted fishing rod and a super overpowered bow. I used the grindstone to disenchant the new books for a little bit of XP and finally crafted my bookshelf and lectern. I brought another villager into the basement in a boat and used the lectern to turn them into a librarian that I could buy even more bookshelves from. I finally had an infinite supply of books and could assemble an enchanting table, get a mending villager, and make perfect enchanted gear. I finished off the day by harvesting my farms since I was going to need a lot of emeralds to make a maxed out enchanting table. I quickly realized the small farms outside the house weren't really going to be sufficient to supply emeralds for trading, so I cleared out some space away from everything and tilled a bunch of soil to make a huge carrot and potato farm. I planted a bunch of carrots and then fenced fenced in the entire farm to avoid any more stupid villagers from somehow trampling my crops like they kept managing to do by my house. It was almost as if they had some problem with me. I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. I finished off the farm the next day by planting a few more carrots, putting lily pads over the water, and putting some torches over each lily pad to keep it lit up at night. I used the rest of my day to go around the area and do the random chores I had continued to slack on, like chopping down trees and breeding the animals. I also converted all the farms around the house to wheat farms since they would now mostly be for decoration, and grown wheat by far looks the best. Real Minecraft pros know the play is to have one decorative farm and then one functional farm. On day 66, I returned to the basement to do more building since I finally had more wood to work with. I built out the even block corner and turned it into a small storage area since I couldn't properly fit a villager there, and then cleared out the rest of the flooring and replaced it with oak planks. I wasn't really sure what I was going to use the chests in the corner for, but at least it looked nice, so who really cares? I decided that I wanted to use the random alcove for the enchanting setup in a mending villager, so I dug the walls back and built up all the support beams. The next step in the process was actually crafting the enchanting table, so that's exactly what I did. It hurt having to spend even a single book for it, but that's just because I still wasn't used to having an infinite supply of books yet. I placed down the enchanting table skewed to one side of the alcove and put down the measly 2 bookshelves that I still had on hand. Unfortunately, 2 bookshelves wouldn't be enough for max level enchanting, so I did some more trading and managed to get another 4 bookshelves to put down. Still not good enough, but it was a start. I spent the rest of the day outside in the rain chopping down trees behind the house, and even collected some birchwood since I thought the trapdoors might be a nice addition. I started off the next day doing some routine trading so I could afford more bookshelves, and then hauled yet another villager into the basement on a boat. This time the villager really fought me on it, and they even trampled my crops as they tried to run away from me. I managed to get one back in the boat and killed the other one before fixing the farm they so rudely destroyed. Eventually I got the villager trapped inside their new trading area just like all the others, and then repaired the damage that I had done to the house as the sun was going down. Since I was gonna need even more emeralds to buy mending books once I got the trade, I went and did some farming bright and early in the morning. It actually took a while to harvest and replant the entire carrot farm, but it would totally be worth it for like the 10 emeralds that I got from it. That was sarcasm if you couldn't tell. It definitely wouldn't be worth it, but I really didn't have many options here, so yeah. I also chopped down the trees again so I could convert all the logs to planks and then to sticks to sell to the other villager at again an awful price. All these villagers were scamming me, and all I could think about is how much I missed having bamboo. The lesson to learn here is don't take bamboo for granted. After I finished all my trading and placed down the new bookshelves, I used the last remaining one to craft a lectern and started trying to get mending on the new villager. While I was resetting them, I noticed their prices were jacked up, but chalked it up to classic inflation and went on with resetting them even more. As the day ended, I got a mending trade for only 64 emeralds. I did a lot more trading out the gate the next day since I was gonna need a ton of emeralds to get a mending book, but I figured the librarian would eventually reduce the price back to normal. When I finished trading with the Fletcher, I went back to the librarian to lock in their mending book just in case, and I quickly realized I actually locked in a fire protection 3 enchant instead of mending. Apparently, it switched while I wasn't looking, and I forgot to double check. I disposed of the now useless villager, brought in another one, and it took all the way until the end of the day 71 to get another mending trade. I made sure to lock in the trade right away and was able to enchant my nearly broken pickaxe and apply the mending book before laying down for the night. I was so excited to enchant the rest of my tools and no longer have to worry about them breaking, so I spent majority of the day trading with the villagers and slowly enchanting each tool and applying a mending book to it. Once the enchanting and trading was done and I was fresh out of emeralds, I just went back to cut down more trees and harvest more crops to do it all over again. I really wanted to make progress towards diamond gear since I was still stuck in iron, so I went down into the mine with my newly enchanted pickaxe and started mining for diamonds again. It didn't take long before I realized I shouldn't be mining for diamonds without Fortune 3 on my pickaxe since they were a limited resource, so I went back up to the surface at the end of the day in hopes of upgrading my pickaxe even further. Because I was stupid and didn't enchant my pickaxe initially with Fortune before applying mending, my only option was to trade for Fortune 3. I snagged a villager from the breeder, boated them into the basement of the house, and started re-rolling their trades for Fortune 3. I did manage to get Fortune 3 before the end of the day and traded for it right away to lock in the villager. I upgraded my pickaxe and got some rest before embarking on a very large mining expedition. I returned back to the mine the next day with my my newly even more upgraded pickaxe and was on the hunt for diamonds. I pretty quickly came across a vein of 7 diamond ore, which netted me 14 diamonds using Fortune 3. Suffice to say, the Fortune enchant was well worth spending a few days to get. I continued to mine for the rest of the day and got plenty of redstone, a little bit of gold and iron, and another 9 diamonds. Once I had enough to finish my diamond gear, I went back to the house and dumped my haul into my chests. I also mined some random pockets of coal in a little pond near the border, so I didn't have to keep converting all of my wood that I needed for trading into charcoal. The start of day 76 was a monumentous occasion since it's when I crafted my full set of diamond armor along with a diamond sword. I was cutting it close with meeting my goal of getting fully enchanted netherite gear by day 100, but I work better under pressure, so I took a break to swap out the oak trap doors next to the windows for birch trap doors. After using up all my birch trap doors, I planted all the birch saplings that I had, and while I waited for them to grow, I finished off the remaining parts of the basement. I used this as a chance to finally connect the mine to the basement in a proper way and placed a few ladders leading down to the mine staircase. Clearly, this was the perfect time to do it as well, since I just got my full diamond gear and likely wouldn't be going mining again anytime soon. While I continued to work on improving the house, I went on a hunt for squid since I wanted ink to make light gray dye and try out light gray glass panes in the windows. I checked a few caves and a pond near the house, but none of them were the right biome. Luckily, I found out that the far corner of the border by the village was just eking into a river biome and will be able to spawn squid for me very soon if there was enough space. I noted this for later and chopped down all the trees that had grown nearby. With my supply of birch wood refreshed, I returned to replacing the trapdoors in the house and managed to finish off the second floor right as the sun was setting. I was so motivated from finally adding in some new detail to the house that I finished off the very last bits of the basement that were left undone and then ran around the entire house adding in even more detail like lanterns and pots with flowers in them. It wasn't too much, but every little bit I could add to the house would help it look nicer since I was still so resource starved. You know, if you couldn't tell from the fact that my house still didn't even have glass panes in the windows yet. On day 79, the border had expanded enough for me to attempt to spawn some squid for ink, so I went over to the corner of the border and dug a hole down into the water to give ample room for them to spawn. While I waited to see if it would work, I harvested the potato and carrot farm and traded with the villagers to try and repair my tools. Since I was reaching the home stretch, I decided it was time and crafted an inventory full of beds so I could do some explosion mining in the Nether. I quickly checked on the squid farm before the sun went down, and to my surprise, there were multiple squid in there, so I took it as a sign of good luck and killed all of them. With my inventory full of beds and fire resistance potions from the piglins, I headed into the Nether on day 80 with the goal of not leaving until I had enough ancient debris to upgrade majority of my gear into netherite. I pretty quickly realized it was going to be a huge pain since I couldn't even dig down to the proper Y level to do the mining, and I ended up having to bridge across the roof of the Nether to one of the border corners where I was finally able to dig down to Y level 15. I dug a decent length tunnel to get away from the basalt and started blast mining with the beds in hopes I would get lucky. I spent the next 5 days in the Nether blast mining with beds and eventually just branch mining when I failed to find a single piece of ancient debris from the explosions. Luckily, my pickaxe durability was sustained by mining nether quartz and gold nuggets, but the entire experience of mining directly under a massive lava lake was such a huge pain it had me reconsidering my life decisions. Maybe being called a loser with only diamond armor wasn't that bad. Maybe diamond armor would be cool again and I just had to wait it out. Either way, I stuck it out and left the Nether at the end of day 85 with 25 ancient debris, a fair bit of gold nuggets, and a fully repaired pickaxe. When I got back to the house, I tossed the ancient debris in the furnace, converted all the gold nuggets to ingots, and crafted 6 netherite ingots. I chose to upgrade all my armor to netherite along with upgrading my pickaxe and my axe. I immediately put my new fancy axe to use, chopping down trees, and then did some villager trading before enchanting some of my armor. The chestplate turned out mediocre, but the pants were pretty solid. I now realize I was being an idiot and must have broken a bookshelf for some reason since I was only enchanting level 28 and totally griefing myself. On day 87, I finally looked up what sound setting villagers were and turned it off completely. Turns out there is a reason most people don't keep villagers in their main house, and I'm sure my editor hates me most of all for doing doing exactly that. I remembered that I had gotten the ink that I wanted before going into the Nether, so I tried out light gray glass panes for the windows of the house, but ended up actually disliking how it looked and just opted to use white glass panes instead. I guess I could have done the windows a really long time ago, but better late than never. After finally finishing up the house, I did a bit more trading and enchanting my helmet yet again with a level 28 enchant. The next day I decided to work on a new area for the animals since I couldn't end off the video with a super basic pen from day like 20 or something. I filled in the pond that I used for fishing in the hopes I'd never have to fish again, and then built a much larger and fancier set of pens for both the sheep and the cows. I didn't have nearly enough blocks to finish the build, but I led the animals in right away so I could tear down their old pens and terraform that area. Unfortunately, this meant it was time to remove the large quantity of cats, but once the terrible deed was done, I started covering up the entire area in layers and layers of dirt so I wouldn't have a whole pet cemetery situation going on down there. I took a break from terraforming the area in front of the house on day 90 and did some tree chopping and farm harvesting, so again I could do even more trading with my now pleasantly silent villagers. Once all the trading was done, I did a bit more design work on the animal pens by making some paths and placing down bales of hay. The last thing I needed to finish off the animal pens was a roof to shield them from the near constant rain in this world, so I crafted some campfires to make a cool design I had seen actual good builders use before. I put the campfires down and extinguished them with water to make the new roof, but I didn't have nearly enough campfires to cover the entire thing. Since I was still waiting for saplings to grow to get more wood, I started tearing down some villager houses inside the border because I figured I already had done enough terrible things to them, so what's one more? I managed to get just enough wood to make the campfires and finish the animal pen roof right as the sun went down. Over the next 2 days, I did a bunch more terraforming outside the front of the house so I had more room to work with, and then made a path running from the animal pens to the front door. I used a bunch of bone meal around the area to give it some life with flowers and tall grass since it was looking a little bit bland. To finish off the area, I added in a few lampposts next to the path using a pretty basic design and was thrilled with how everything was looking. On day 94, I started the last project of the video, which would be an iron golem farm. I planned to put this on the other side of the house, so I spent majority of the day terraforming that area as well. It wasn't too bad leveling off the area, so once I was done, I spent the rest of the day sitting at the crafting table, making every block I would need for the farm. I spent the next 3 days assembling the basic iron golem farm, following the tutorial by Squishy, since I've never actually made a vanilla iron golem farm before. I won't go into too much detail on the build since it's nothing fancy and maybe you've even done it before, but once I had the spawning and killing area complete, I moved 3 villagers into their new underground home to trigger the golem spawning. I didn't have much use for the ugly villager breeder after that, so I took the opportunity to tear the entire thing down and ended up trapping a zombie for the golem farm in the process. While I was getting the zombie situated to trigger the golem spawning, a golem actually spawned right on top of me and nearly killed me, which would have been the most moronic way to fail a 100 days video mere days before finishing it. As I was heading up to sleep, I noticed a wandering villager spawned finally, but unfortunately they weren't selling spruce saplings, so they were basically dead to me. The next day I started converting the grass blocks around the killing area to path blocks since apparently there's a chance the golem spawns there instead and the path blocks would prevent that from happening. It was super boring and the area was massive, but I finished it up and then harvested all my farms. I finished off the day by trading with all the villagers in hopes of getting enough XP to finish off my enchanting before day 100. With one single day left, I went back into the Nether to try and get the last pieces of ancient debris that I needed to have fully enchanted netherite gear. I ended up going straight to branch mining this time since the blast mining with the beds did not work very well for me before, and I ignored a good chunk of the nether quartz and gold nuggets since I wasn't really worried about pickaxe durability anymore and was in a little bit of a rush. I returned to the overworld with 9 ancient debris in the middle of the night and quickly smelted it down. I crafted the ingots, upgraded both my remaining tools, enchanted every remaining piece of gear, and put mending on everything that I had. And with that, it was finally day 100. I managed to survive 100 days in a world with an expanding world border. I overcame tons of obstacles from having extremely limited resources and finished off with an awesome house and fully enchanted netherite gear. Thanks for watching and be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.